Get started. I want to first open up with prayer. If Representative Lawikia can do that, it'd be awesome.
Let's pray. Heavenly Father God, we thank you for this day. God, we thank you for the precious gifts of life, love, liberty, freedom, God. Just the fact that we're here today means that we have some unfinished business to attend to, because God, when you're finished, there will be no issues that need attending. God, just help us as we make decisions on behalf of our state and of our communities, that we would always look through your eyes and walk with your feet and touch with your hands. Help us in all that we do. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. All right. I just wanted this morning just to start off by saying that I'm excited to be here at this second committee hearing and to continue learning. How to stop welfare fraud so that we utilize we the people's money wisely, and that the truly needy are being helped, and to not forget all the men, women, and children who are on the disabled list here in Georgia who truly need help, and look forward to helping that. And as we talked last time, I think we saw, you can't get rid of poverty by giving people money, not that just alone, that we have to have ways for people to climb out of poverty and have incentives for them to try by having work requirements. It would help a lot, which we do not have completely here in Georgia, and I think we do need to implement that very shortly in the near future to deter those who are thinking that they can get a free ride when they're not the ones truly hurting and need the money. So therefore, we're taken right out of the mouths of those who are needing it most. We do have some problems and need to close the loopholes that are out there. We have wasted almost $1 trillion since 2003 in improper payments and all that. So adding up, that's a lot. And, what are we showing for it? And so we definitely, have a problem out there. And it's not a problem just here in Georgia. It's all over the country. And so we've got to stop the loopholes, or should I say limit what's going on. There's no perfect anything, but we can strive to be as perfect as we can. And I think the people deserve that, the ones who are hurting. $125 billion was wasted in 2014 of improperly payments being shelled out. And just to think about it, $85 billion in this nation was cut from our military. So if it's $125 billion in 2014 alone, means we didn't even need to do that if we could just come together as a nation. And this isn't party lines. This is none of that. This is just we the people of America, and we need this, not just in Georgia, but all over. So, and then we have the military hurting $85 billion when that should not be the case at all and does not need to be. So, and also in 2013, $139 million just here in Georgia of improper payments, food stamps and all that. So it just shows you we have a problem, and then we need to come together, as the people of Georgia, and work towards fixing this and helping the people who truly need it. And as I said, the biggest thing I think, at least that weighs on my mind all the time, is the men, women, and children on the disabled list should not be at all, not even for a second, should they be going to bed at night going, when am I going to get help? But then we are. I know I am, and I'm blessed. I'm going home. I have a pillow to lay my head on, all that, and food in my belly and all that. And I'm being able to live my life, but they can't because they're hurting. So anyways, that is what motivates me, and I know it motivates all of us. So glad to have all of you here this morning. First off, I'd like to open up with a short video, if we can.
Obamacare added millions of Americans to Medicaid rolls. Channel 2's Justin Gray discovered new government data shows Medicaid providers kicked out of the program for bad behavior in one state are being allowed to go to another and still collect your tax dollars.
It sounds like common sense. If a doctor is kicked out of Medicaid for bad behavior, they shouldn't be able to get back in just by changing their address. But a new government audit finds that's exactly what's happening with thousands of Medicaid providers.
They simply close up shop, move to the next state, and start it all over again.
Federal investigators found that in 12% of the cases where a provider is terminated from Medicaid, they're still allowed to stay on the Medicaid rolls. In other states, it's costing you, the taxpayer, millions of dollars a year. Leslie Page is with Citizens Against Government Waste.
It's easy pickings. If you are an unscrupulous provider, you see Medicaid as like taking candy from a baby.
We looked at the numbers for Georgia. 8 providers terminated by other states were working there in 2012. You might think this doesn't sound like that much money in the grand scheme of things, but you have to look at the larger picture. The Government Accountability Office estimates that Medicare and Medicaid are spending $60 billion a year in improper payments.
And Medicare and Medicaid are the biggest drivers of improper payments across the entire federal government.
The audit finds there's no good system in place for states to inform each other when they kick providers out of Medicaid. Reporting in Washington, Justin Gray, Channel 2 Action News.
In their official response to the audit, Medicaid officials agreed that the agency needs to set up a better system of communication between. Obamacare added millions of Americans to Medicaid rolls. Channel 2's Justin Gray discovered new government data shows Medicaid providers kicked out of the program for bad behavior in one state are being allowed to go to another and still collect your tax dollars.
It sounds like common sense. If it
I would like to have, let me turn it down a little bit more. I would like to have Trey Harrison, the director from LexisNexis. Thank you for coming this morning and testifying.
How about now? Oh, there we go. Thanks you all very much for having me today. As Representative Clark indicated, my name is Trey Harrison. I've been a lifelong resident of the state of Georgia. I grew up out in Alpharetta when it was a very different place. Shortly after graduate school, I joined the Atlanta-based company Consultech that invented, more or less, the Medicaid Management Information System in the 70s. And they immediately put me to work on health and human services programs in 1998. That's been my focus in my career since then. I've been with LexisNexis for the last 4 years. When I started out with Consultech, I worked on the Georgia Success Project, which was the first integrated eligibility system that the state ever had. It's the system currently being replaced by Deloitte today. Going back to the days we would sit down at training sessions with caseworkers in Albany, and they would sit down in front of their computer, grab the mouse, and try to turn it on like it was a remote control. That was kind of the beginning of when technology began to take a real stand in the process of eligibility, which had benefits, but also had some key disadvantages. You look at the DFACS workers today, their caseload is well over 1,000. So, days in the past, you knew people, you knew their families, you knew who they were, you knew who was receiving benefits. You cannot keep up with over 1,000 cases on your rolls. My relatives down outside of Albany today are caseworkers for DFACS, and they just simply can't do it. They don't see the people. That's the reality of our modern world. That's the reality of how benefits are being delivered today. It's not just Georgia, that's every state. I call on 20 states in my region. That's everybody's problem. As we catch up to that reality, states are realizing that there are some ways that technology can help alleviate the problems that it has in some ways created. So it's a wonderful thing that you can go online and apply for benefits. It's a wonderful thing that people can have benefits streamlined to them, and as you say, not have to wait unduly for benefits. But at the same time, you're opening up the program to the entire world. States that are online with eligibility systems, and we work with a handful of them around the country, regularly see IP addresses coming in from, you know, Chechnya, Eastern Europe, Africa, places that where people living there certainly do not deserve our SNAP benefits, certainly do not deserve our Medicaid benefits. There are very real attacks going on. We see them every day. And what I want to talk about today are some things that states have done to alleviate some of those concerns and apply really just sound safeguards, the kind of things that the banking industry has been doing for years, the kind of thing the insurance industry has been doing for years, but state agencies are just sort of waking up to the need to apply safeguards to their programs. As we go, guys, please feel free to hit me with questions. I'm going to refer to a couple things in this document. I don't want to be tied to it, but I just want to open up a dialogue. I need to say a couple things about LexisNexis just to ground you as far as who we are and what we do. What I want to get into as quickly as possible is the end of this document, where I talk about what other states have done to safeguard the health and human services programs. We're a worldwide company, part of the Reed Elsevier group of companies. Our headquarters for LexisNexis here in the United States are out in Alpharetta. We have 300 or 400 people going to work every day on Windward Parkway. I come into that office a little bit. I'm out in the field more than I'm in there. But what we do, our bread and butter, is to aggregate personal identity data for every person, living, resident alien, living and dead in the United States for over the last 30 years. We collect every touch that you have in the public record, and we purchase records in the private record as well. If you look at slide 4, this is one I definitely want to reference because it kind of just explains where we're coming from when we applied these solutions. The credit bureaus are one of our sources. They're one of the foundational sources for the data that we bring in. We bring in all 3 credit headers. We also bring in government sources. We purchase data from every state in the nation. In fact, Georgia just became a whole lot more expensive for its data. Good for y'all as a taxpayer. It's a good idea. We pull federal records. But we also go well beyond that. We pull behavioral sources, such as phones. If I were to go today and switch my phone from Verizon to AT&T, LexisNexis would know about it inside of 15 minutes. They would know my phone number, my address, and all the identifying information on that phone record. Likewise, we get utility records, which are a great source of data for people who don't, for example, have a deep credit history. And it'll become more important as we talk about the folks that we're serving here today. And finally, we have a customer network of companies that we buy data from. Companies that collect Shoppers Club records, for example. Companies that bring you pizza, for example. So the end result of this is we have over 20,000 unique data sources that we bring in for every human being in the United States on a minute-to-minute, day-to-day basis. The reason that is important is on slide 5, as I indicate. The credit bureaus know about people like you and I. They know about people who have mortgages, people who have a couple of credit cards, people who have a deep history of credit and identity within the public record. Lexis goes well beyond that, and the reason that is important is when we're talking about health and human services, when we're talking about the folks being served by these programs, they do not have the deep credit footprint. They don't have a credit card. They've never owned a home. They are invisible, and it's actually a nationwide issue how the folks who are credit invisible can build credit, but in the purposes of identifying, yes, you are really this person, yes, you are really eligible for the human services benefits, the credit bureaus are blind to those folks. That's where LexisNexis excels, in knowing those folks and knowing about them, and ultimately being able to safeguard their benefits. So, as I mentioned, the health and human service agencies are under attack. I will belabor you. I will not make you go through our regular scare tactics, if you will. If you don't know already, I'm sure many of you do, all of our identities have already been stolen. They're in circulation in the criminal, they're available on the dark web. They're a commodity. Driver's licenses are easy to fake. The slide I have here on slide 6, that is a real website, really good fakes, where you can get driver's licenses, which in many states is all you need to obtain benefits. Somebody looks at it, and there you go. This is a epidemic. It can't be stopped. What can be done is you can safeguard against the inappropriate use of those identities. Looking at slide 7, here's really what we do. This is what we do in Health and Human Services at LexisNexis. We fill in blind spots. Since the early 2000s, I've been working mostly in fraud, waste, and abuse in Health and Human Services, and it wasn't until these last 4 years at LexisNexis that I realized we were working in the dark. We knew what Medicaid providers told us when they applied. On that video, you saw Medicaid providers tell you, here's my information, here's who I am, they apply, they get into Medicaid. They didn't tell you they lost their license in California. They didn't tell you they were convicted of Medicaid fraud in Louisiana, so you don't know about it. Likewise, on the recipient beneficiary side, you don't know if someone is using the identity of a deceased person in many cases, if someone is incarcerated in many cases. We do tests of data files for Health and Human Service agencies all the time. In the last 4 years, I've probably conducted 8 tests on behalf of state agencies. We find these conditions all the time. We find deceased folks still on the rolls, still receiving benefits. We find incarcerated folks. We find identities that have never existed in the public record, where a criminal element will take your social security number, your name, and your address, create an identity, receive benefits. We see it all the time. So the solutions I'm going to start to talk about address those very concerns. Underneath just the information about the folks participating in your programs is the nature of their relationships between them. So you know, maybe the Medicaid provider has a good identity, all's fine with his license, but he's got a shared address with 5 Medicaid beneficiaries. Maybe he's got a shared address with criminal elements. These are the kinds of things that you can't necessarily keep someone off the rolls for, but you can certainly, in a program integrity fashion, keep an eye on them. So if my wife was convicted of Medicaid fraud in Alabama, you can't necessarily kick me out if I'm a otherwise licensed doctor, but wouldn't you want to know? Agencies currently are working without that knowledge. They know what people tell them when they apply, and then they see claims. Likewise on SNAP. You know what people tell you when they apply, and then you see the money going out the door. So just to sort of set the stage, and where we help, moving on to slide 8, it's really broken up between the beneficiary side of the house and the provider side of the house. So beneficiary-wise, we help states achieve that comprehensive view to identify the risk elements. We find SNAP recipients driving Bentleys. We find Medicaid recipients in $1 million condos. We find all of these things every day. In a minute, when we talk about a project we did for the state of New York, I'm going to talk about rolling all of those risk indications up into an overall risk score so you can find the worst of the worst, and state folks can work on those cases first. The provider side of the house, and again, Representative Clark, you couldn't have picked a better video for me to come in on. I'll spend a little time on this, slide 9. LexisNexis has been around for decades doing the personal identity information. It's been about 6 or 7 years we've been very serious in the healthcare space. So we started with our existing repository of personal information. And in the last 6 years, we've aggressively acquired medical provider data. We've made 2 key acquisitions of companies dedicated to aggregating the information about doctors, about pharmacists, about acupuncturists, physical therapists, chiropractors, every licensed provider of medical services in the United States, we have aggregated into one spot. We know all about them. All 50 state licenses, all the federal exclusion lists, all their criminal history, all their criminal associations, anything you would want to know about the provider. In 8 states today, we do Medicaid provider screening that keeps exactly what you saw in that video, however many 12 cases in Georgia. We stopped that from happening. We screen the providers when they apply, the day they apply, and then for those states, we screen the entire population of providers on a monthly basis to identify any risk elements that have occurred since then.
Do we have, do y'all do it here in Georgia?
We do not. Screening and enrollment is handled by your Medicaid MMIS fiscal agent. And to be perfectly honest, we work with them in other states. We do not work with them here. There are things that states can do by themselves, so they're probably up to speed on Georgia's licensure and on Georgia's conditions, but there are likely blind spots in the other 49 states.
Do you have a number of how many providers do you have caught in other states that you're covering now?
You know, that's discoverable. I don't know off the top of my head,
Okay.
and it's constantly going. That's something I can certainly find for you. You know, the ones that we actually deflected or alerted or kept off the rolls, I can certainly discover that for you guys. And it's not, again, 12 in Georgia. It's not the overwhelming majority of providers, well-intentioned, just doing their job. These are very much outlier cases, but when you're talking about a Medicaid provider, it's the ultimate license to steal. When they said 12, and somebody mentioned, you know, it doesn't sound like that big a deal. A single provider can be many millions of dollars to the state. A Medicaid provider license is literally the ultimate license to steal. So it's those little cases around the edges.
Yeah, and I think also, you know, you can say, okay, there's only that many providers, but every little bit adds up, you know, and it affects that person who's not getting the help, who needs it, and it is massively huge. And in the end, when you add it all up through Georgia and the other states in the country, and then through years that go on, it adds up majorly. So
no one, again, I've been on the fraud, waste, and abuse side since the early 2000s. No one is sure how deep the rabbit hole goes on fraud. There's estimates all over, and they're all really, really scary, but nobody really knows even how deep it goes. The 12 is probably based on a one-to-one match of their name and their license information. One thing that's important about how we do things, so we're taking in, like I said, 20,000 sources. People show up all kinds of different ways in the public and private record. I go by Trey. My name is really Wilbur McDonald Harrison III. It's like a title, but with no land or money. So I show up. I'm Trey Harrison some places. I'm W.M. Harrison some places. I'm Wilbur Harrison in some places. I show up all kinds of different ways. Maybe somebody at the utility company fat-fingered my social, so it's a 4-5 instead of a 5-4. Those kinds of things are just basic bread and butter to us. We capture all of those things, and we link our secret sauce, if you will, is something we call Lex ID to make sure that Trey is the same guy no matter how he appears. So when you say you found 12, there's probably more than 12, because in one record he's Wilbur, in one record he's WM, and he fat-fingered his social intentionally, and it got through. So not only do we have more of the data, we're better at linking it up. And when I talk about a project here in a minute that actually Georgia's involved in, that's going to be real important, the National Accuracy Clearinghouse we're doing. So just to close the book on the provider's side of the house, we have some excellent projects there. Our Michigan customer was our most demanding customer, and we had many a late night working for those guys, but as a result we have a better product, and they've pushed us to make sure we are doing our linking correctly and making sure we're not confusing, you know, Dr. Junior with Dr. the Third or Dr. Senior with Dr. Junior. There have been all kinds of nuances that over the last 2 or 3 years we've been doing this have made it really solid, a very solid project. Yes.
It would be helpful for us as we're going through this process if one of those states was a similar size to our state, and we could actually look at some of the data from that to compare for our state's benefit.
Michigan's probably in the ballpark.
It would
I
be.
know Indiana and Arkansas are smaller. Michigan's probably the closest in terms of size.
That would be great if we could get some of
Maybe
the
a little
similars.
bigger. Michigan might be a little bigger, but I'll dig it up.
That'd be great.
Like I said, we're an 8. I know Kansas, Indiana are smaller. Colorado's smaller. I'll find it.
Okay,
I'll find it.
perfect.
Yeah,
Thank you,
for
sir.
analysis, provider state. Okay. Okay. So, good. Now we can finally start talking about projects. That's enough about us. Let's talk about what states are doing. Looking at slide 11, if you guys don't know about this, I want to let you know about the National Accuracy Clearinghouse. This was a project that actually started well before LexisNexis became involved in it. I believe in 2008. Mississippi was sort of the squeaky wheel, if you will, that started things. Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and Florida, their SNAP programs suspected, heard, thought there were anecdotal stories of people double dipping on their SNAP rolls. So in my example, there could be a Wilbur Harrison in Mississippi with SNAP benefits and a Trey Harrison in Alabama, double dipping. For years, forever, the federal government has had a system I'm sure you'll hear about called Paris that is supposed to catch that. There are two problems with Paris. It's not real time. So the process for Paris is you let somebody into the SNAP program, and then several months later you get a Paris match, and you say, I got to go, disenroll this. I got to go do work to disenroll this person after several months of benefits have gone out the door. The other problem with Paris is the match has to be 1-to-1. It doesn't account for Trey. It wouldn't catch, a public record where my dad's referred to as Bubba. It wouldn't catch those kinds of things. So we are just coming out of a year-long study period with that. The federal government, Food and Nutrition Services, is literally within a week or so of releasing a study. I have some of the preliminary results from that study that I want to share with you, and I'll certainly share the final report with the agency, with the committee. But what we do instead is we use our matching technology. We refer to the public records that we have, and we identify with high confidence what the project calls collisions. And we put those collisions and that information on the caseworker's desk before the benefits go out. The results have been tremendous. If you turn over to the slide in Mississippi alone, they saved $2.6 million just in Mississippi on deflected enrollments. One of the troublesome things that we did find is that, yes, there have been some cases where somebody, I just forgot to tell Alabama I was moving. There were some oversight situations. Unfortunately, we did find a high percentage of the time there was intentional double dipping going on. It was a little bit disheartening. We identified in the 5-state region, we identified over 10,000 dual participants during the pilot period. Double dippers, yeah, correct. Absolutely double dip. In Georgia, in May, it was the only data I have is for May, we identified 3,400 or so, 3,464 dual participants trying to come on the rolls for Georgia SNAP. The study is going to come out with a number around the range of $180,000 a month saved for Georgia alone. And again, I'll share the final results. It should be a week or so. Florida Medicaid is doing something interesting that I would, as a Georgia taxpayer, I would suggest that the state consider because the NAC is a verified source of residence in another state. In other words, if I'm on the SNAP rolls in Alabama, I've attested to my residence in Alabama. It is a willful attestation of residence in the state. Florida Medicaid has taken it upon themselves to utilize the results from the NAC, even though it was originally intended for SNAP, to have direct application for Medicaid. In the last couple months, they have disenrolled 239 Medicaid participants, and if you take the average $5,000 a year for a Medicaid recipient, the Kaiser Family Foundation says, you're talking about over $1 million in savings just in the last couple of months, just as they were trying to figure out what to do with this data. Mississippi is the holder of that contract. They have made it available to all other states to come on. Georgia's already a participant for SNAP, but through Mississippi, other states can participate for Medicaid as well. Any questions about that one? We're really proud of that project. It's an example to bring in, to create a clearinghouse using state data in combination with our data to direct use.
That's not something that would need legislative action, though, right? Would that not be something that we could do through an agency to use that same process for Medicaid that we use for SNAP? Is that
correct? That could be, DCH could do that directly with the Department of Human Services in Mississippi, and I've got the contact information for Joel over there. It's brand new. It's not like anybody's just missed anything here. That's brand new. Moving on to, again, the Florida story. In Florida and in Michigan, we do the identity proofing in front of SNAP benefits as well as Medicaid benefits. I'm sure you all will hear as you conduct these hearings. The federal government for Medicaid applicants offer a solution for identity proofing through the federal hub. It's a credit bureau-based solution that, as I mentioned, is blind to many of these participants. And when a identity proofing solution is blind to someone who is applying, it creates a dummy quiz. What the kind of quiz that we create as you apply for benefits in Florida and Michigan, we look back into your public record and we ask you questions. Before you're allowed to get benefits in Florida, we'll say things like, what color was the Nissan Sentra you drove in 1987? What address did you share with Jamie Harrison in 1993? Which of these addresses have you never lived at? So we go back into your records, we create things called out-of-wallet questions. So if somebody snatched your wallet, you wouldn't be able to answer the question about where do you live with your mom when you were just out of college. Those are the kinds of things we do. Every now and then, 1% of the time in Medicaid and SNAP, we can't see somebody. We are talking about people who are truly off the grid when we're talking about SNAP. We create, 1% of the time, we create a diversionary quiz. And it's no secret to the fraudsters out there, I'm not sharing anything. The answer to the diversionary quiz is none of the above, because we don't know. So you're going to see, coming out of the federal hub, you're going to see a high number of diversionary quizzes. And then the cow's out of the barn there. Everybody knows that. The other issue with the federal hub is that it can't be applied for SNAP-only recipients. So you're flying without not having some degree of knowledge-based authentication on the front door of benefits is like not having a lock on your front door of your house. So we've done this in Florida now for going on about 18 months. The state is very excited about the solution. It was the recipient of a governor's service award for saving caseworkers time, because they didn't have to look through a big stack of documents, somebody proving who they were, because the person already did that. And it also saved money in terms of deflecting inappropriate enrollment. One of the very first things we do in that check is, hey, does this identity exist anywhere? Is this name and this social and this date of birth correct at all? Does it make sense? And we would deflect those applications where just nonsense was coming in the door. And again, Michigan is in the process of doing exactly that. Michigan is going to the additional step of having us screen after the fact to look at those conditions that I talked about earlier. Who's driving the Lamborghini, who's living out of state, who's got, several properties, things along those lines. We have a sister company called Acuity that actually has access to bank account data. So if I'm coming on for age, blind, and disabled benefits, it's required that states check my property history for the last 5 years and my bank account to make sure I'm really truly deserving of these benefits, because in age, blind, and disabled, you're talking about a state responsibility of maybe $200,000, maybe $250,000 a year in many cases. So the federal government instituted these mandates. So between LexisNexis, we do the 5-year look back into the property and the property transfers, and Acuity does the bank account data. And they're currently doing that in 4 or 5 states. They work in Florida, and they currently have 100% of the banks in the state of Georgia participating. Any questions about that before I move on? That's a really meaty topic. I could talk for days about that, but I don't want to bore anybody. The identity proofing is something that you really have to keep up with the fraudsters. Like I said, to put the quiz out there is a good step. If I had to do one the other day when I changed my 401k. If you open a credit card online, you go through some kind of quiz. It's out there. If I lose my wallet and I have to go to Hartsfield and fly somewhere today, the TSA will run me through a LexisNexis quiz. It's a very basic step. What our Florida customer is pushing us to do now is to go beyond it, to multi-factor authentication, to sending information to people's, capturing a cell phone, to scanning the backs of driver's licenses, on up to, you know, the sort of space age stuff of the bio recognition, voice and facial recognition, because like I said, in the modern world, we're all under cyber attack every day. So to not have some degree of KBA is literally just not like not having a lock on your front door.
How many states are y'all doing this?
Two, and it does require that states apply for a waiver from the federal government to put a. You would be surprised how little is required to apply for SNAP. You're not required to give a social. You're not required to. You really have to ask a lot of questions of the federal government to put up any kind of step in front of that. But it's been done before. Florida did it first. Michigan used the Florida model to get their approval to do it. Right now, I work in the state of Missouri. They're in the process of trying to do it as well. So it's not something you can turn on tomorrow. LexisNexis could, but the state would need to get some Mother May I.
Many steps that will be involved, and
Correct.
timelines are extended.
I think the federal government was a 3-month loop for Florida. Michigan had some issues with their eligibility system that the feds held over their heads, so I think it took about 5-6 months to get the approval for Michigan. I was on both those projects. So it's not like it's years, but it's
Okay.
I'd be remiss if I'd let y'all think it was a momentary fix.
Right.
Just to wrap up, these are a handful of projects slide 14 I want to highlight, because they're things that other states do that work. I mentioned that we work for the New York Medicaid program as administered by the city of New York. They were interested in the data that we have, but you always have to take it with a grain of salt. As I mentioned to you, Representative Ballinger, I can drive a Bentley and be on SNAP. That's okay. That's actually not a precluded condition. You would ask, how am I paying for the Bentley? How am I paying for the insurance on the Bentley? But just the evidence, or even a $500,000 home, it's income. It's entirely income driven. So what we have are indications of risk. It's weird that I would drive a Bentley and be on SNAP. It's not precluded. So instead of purchasing from LexisNexis a whole bunch of data attributes and tell me everybody's driving, what they pushed us to do was roll everything up and create an overall risk score. So the Bentley makes my risk score go up. If my identity shows as deceased, it goes up some more. If I have shared addresses with felons in the past, it goes up some more. So at the end of the day, instead of giving them back 60,000 cases to work that may or may not yield results, we asked them how many cases could they work in a month, and they have a big staff in New York, and we gave them that top 100, the most risky, the highest on their scores. And what they were able to do was go from a 15-20% disenrollment rate to about an 80% disenrollment rate. It was all about making their staff more efficient and looking at cases where there was smoke and fire instead of going down rabbit holes. Because truth be told, and if you guys hear from Maximus next week, data can lead you down rabbit holes, especially with the regulations around how you can get off of SNAP, how you can disenroll someone from SNAP. Maximus will tell you about it because they have the widgets and the operational folks who can help you work through those cases. So what we like to do is roll all of the risk attributes up into one risk score and say, how many cases do you want? We'll turn on the faucet for 10 cases this week, and we'll just show you the worst of the worst based on the entire profile. And in some cases, well, we find both. We find intentional misrepresentation. A truly rich person wants to get SNAP benefits or traffic SNAP benefits, or a truly rich person wants the state of Georgia to pay for their Medicaid and their medical bills. What we find in many cases, as we're getting more sophisticated about this, is that the $500,000 homeowner, the Bentley driver who's on your Medicaid rolls, has had their identity stolen, and you don't know who it is who's receiving benefits. That's why the identity proofing up front is important, and then the monitoring on the back end is important. In Wisconsin, we run what to us is a very, very basic project. It's just verifying in-state residency. That's for their Medicaid and food share programs. And again, this is one where we offer them tips and leads. This is a very mobile population. We see them move more than other data vendors because we get the utility records and we get, the phone mailing address has changed. But we have been very successful in giving the Wisconsin Program Integrity Office good leads on who's never been associated with the state. We're actually starting round 2 of that process. We're looking at which leads were more effective, which leads were less effective, and trying to give them a cleaner feed. Like, what is the best? Usually it's utilities are the best record, but a lot of times this population does move around. I'd be remiss if I made it seem like it was a magic bullet. It's not, but it makes the agency way more efficient. I mentioned the 5-year asset look back for long-term care, age blind, and disabled folks. We helped the state of Illinois work through a massive backlog, among many backlogs they have in the state of Illinois. I spent a lot of time in Springfield, so I can say that. They had a massive backlog of research for cases. So like we did in New York, we looked back into the history of these most expensive of the expensive. We looked back 5 years as required by law, and we found evidence of quitclaim deeds. Hey, tell me about that $500,000 house you just gave to your son last week before you applied to come on to long-term care at the expense of the state of Illinois. Those kinds of things. We put their investigators on the cases that were most likely to yield returns for the state. I mentioned Michigan, where we do the identity proofing. We talked a little bit about the 8-state profile, and I'll grab a state. It's probably going to be Michigan, and I'll get some metrics on how many we deflect. Yeah, again, it's not going to be a ton, but like I say, it's just one. It's expensive for a state on the Medicaid provider side. Likewise, I've been talking about SNAP and Medicaid mostly. In Lexus's world, Health and Human Service Programs includes unemployment insurance. We do the identity proofing when you make a claim in 8 states for unemployment insurance. Because just as there's a cottage industry of trying to hack into SNAP programs, there is certainly a cottage industry of trying to hack into unemployment benefits. There are things that we are exploring now, looking at the employer side of the house, because the model now is that you'll set up a business, you'll pay in for a couple of months, you'll pay into the unemployment fund for a couple of months, and then you'll go bankrupt. All of your employees get laid off. They all make claims on the state. So between the business records that LexisNexis has and the personal identity data that LexisNexis has, we're crafting solutions to address that, in addition to just guarding the front door. I feel like I've laid a lot on you guys. I've got some follow-up. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much for that. I have a question about the monitoring. When in the beginning of your presentation, you said that DFACS caseloads are 1,000 per caseworker. And can you break that down for me? Do you mean 1,000 of Medicaid cases or SNAP benefit or all together?
They're all rolled up. It's mostly SNAP that we're talking about when we talk about a DFACS case.
Okay.
That's the number. Last time we sat down with them, DFACS uses our lookup tool, but what they mostly use it for is to find relatives for kids in foster care, because the results are better if you place somebody in a family home. So that's the main contact we've had with DFACS over the years, is they're using our tools to find family members for those kids. So that's just something that they had mentioned to me. It's not out of step with other states. I think it's somewhere between 1,000 and 1,200.
And is this this data, is this online? Like, is there somewhere that you just, they told you this, or is it like?
They told me that.
Okay.
And again, the number's somewhere around there. I didn't mean to say that as like a Kaiser family statistic.
Okay.
It's many multiples of hundreds at least.
Okay.
But the number I'd heard, like I say, last time I visited over there on Peachtree was in the thousands.
Okay. And is there any way that we can like make sure we like fact check this, so that, because I really would like to know exactly the number.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have.
Please do.
Yeah. Completely anecdotal. I have a couple sisters-in-law who work down in South Georgia for DFACS. That's what they do.
Now I do believe no. Yeah, I work with DFACS a lot, so I do believe that it's a lot. But I just really would like to know the number. Is it 200 or is it 1,000? Because it's kind of,
I run across it in a bunch of states. South Carolina's running about that same kind of number. And I was in a meeting a couple months ago, and this is just the modern world. I was trying to kick things off. How often do your caseworkers see their cases, see their membership? One of the deputy directors like, "Oh, we try never to see them." Like,
wow.
Caught me by surprise. Quite literally, the service model has outgrown the operational capacity.
Okay. Thank you.
I had my hands full keeping up with 60 students at Mississippi State when I was teaching there. I can imagine keeping up with more than 100.
I have a 5-year-old, so that's enough.
Any other questions to the committee members?
And I saw them 3 times a week.
Thank you so much, Trey.
Thank you.
I was actually in the gym yesterday. I was talking to somebody, and they mentioned that his brother was down in prison in Florida, and somebody was using his Social Security and getting all these benefits, and then he gets out, and now they're actually coming after him saying he needs to repay, and there's something going on they're having to fix. But anyways, I mean, just out of the blue, somebody just mentioned it. I'd mentioned to one person, we're just talking about just fraud and all that, and he's like, "Oh man, you got to hear this." And he tells me about his brother. So. Wow. All right, next we'd like to have Andrew Brown. He's a senior fellow with the Foundation for Government Accountability. And do you want to start with the video you had?
I'll segue into it.
Okay.
Chairman Clark, distinguished members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Andrew Brown. I'm a senior fellow with the Foundation for Government Accountability. FGA is a state-based think tank that works across the country to help states improve lives for their citizens by improving health and welfare programs. My primary area of expertise is child welfare, and I'm glad we just had that brief conversation about the effect on children. Here in Georgia, the child poverty rate's about 26%. And in 2013, it was in the top 10 among states with the highest levels of child poverty rate. Now, this is my wheelhouse, is child welfare. And these kids are part of the reason why we're here today, is protecting the most vulnerable in our society, the people who really need benefits from the rampant waste, fraud, and abuse that's going on in the welfare system. And the work that you're doing will help identify and eliminate this waste, fraud, and abuse, so the 26% of kids in poverty here in this state aren't taken advantage of and receive the help that they deserve. In your last hearing, my colleague Josh Archambault spoke with you about a unique program that we're supporting around the country called Stop the Scam. The federal rules say that Georgia can only redetermine eligibility for programs like Medicaid once per year, unless you have a reason. By working with organizations, third-party data vendors who have access to all of this data on life changes, you can get that reason in close to real time under those federal regulations. This allows you to quickly redetermine eligibility and find waste, fraud, and abuse in the system and get those people off of the welfare rolls early on rather than waiting until the end of the year and realizing, well, we've been overpaying this person for 8 months and have wasted all of that money. You should have received a checklist of best practices for identifying and stopping welfare fraud. And Stop the Scam allows you to check these boxes, to go through this checklist, and even more, to determine if those receiving benefits are truly eligible. Like I've said, we've been working with a number of states, including several southern states, to implement Stop the Scam. And the work of this committee will allow Georgia to join states like Texas, Maine, Kansas, Ohio, and Oklahoma that are already moving toward implementing these reforms. Preliminary results in states that are implementing Stop the Scam reforms find that roughly 10% of the population receiving benefits are ineligible, and 2 to 4% of Medicaid spending can be saved and redirected toward other important priorities like education and tax savings. That would translate to roughly, we estimate, $175 to $350 million in annual taxpayer savings, or $60 to $115 million in annual state budget savings here in Georgia. And from what I heard about $139 million in overpayments for SNAP, I would venture a guess that you could probably find more savings. A few examples from some states who have implemented these reforms. Stop the Scam is really based on a program that was implemented in Illinois to strong bipartisan support. And since 2012, Illinois found 650,000 individuals believed to be ineligible and saved the state $600 million. Massachusetts enacted similar reforms, and in the first year, they removed 205,000 ineligible individuals from their welfare rolls and saved the state an estimated $400 million. During the first 10 months in Pennsylvania, the state found 160,000 ineligible individuals, including prisoners and even some millionaire lottery winners who were collecting benefits. Now, here in the South, Arkansas recently released a report within the last month showing the rampant fraud and abuse that they were able to uncover in their system. And just a few of the lowlights include 43,000 Medicaid enrollees with out-of-state addresses, tens of thousands of enrollees with high-risk identities. That is, their identities have been linked to multiple people. They have social security numbers that aren't found in any public record, or they even have socials that were issued before the enrollee was born. More than 12,000 enrollees in Arkansas owned property worth more than $100,000. Now, while this is not proof of fraud in and of itself, ownership of such an asset does indicate that the enrollee may have more income than they're reporting. And there were even 2 enrollees in Arkansas that were identified who owned property in other states worth $419,000 and $750,000, respectively. Now, the fraud and abuse identified in Arkansas is exactly what Stop the Scam was designed to identify and eliminate. We can talk about the numbers all we want, but I want to get back to what this is really about. This is really about making sure that our states live up to the commitments that we've made to those who are truly in need, to give them help and lift them out of dependence to a life of independence and a life of prosperity. And where you have waste, fraud, and abuse, you harm that goal, and you end up having people stuck in a system for longer than they need to be. During the last hearing, you heard about a young man in Illinois named Jacob Chalky. He suffers from a life-threatening seizure disorder, and due to waste in the system in Illinois and the state tried to cut his benefits off his life-saving medication twice. We've got a brief video that I'll let you hear from Jacob, his family, and those in Illinois who enacted reforms that literally saved his life.
Hi, my name is Christine Chalky. I live in Streator, Illinois with my husband and my 3 boys. One of my boys was born with a very rare developmental disability. We call him our miracle child because he survived and outbeat the odds.
Jacob Alvin, I'm Chalky, and I am 19 years old.
Jake has life-threatening seizure disorder, so he has only one particular medicine that will stop his seizures from happening. When Jake was born and diagnosed at age 6 months, we were basically told that a very grim prognosis.
Because his doctor, he never thought I'd walk, talk.
And then at about age 22 months, he developed seizures, and they told us the seizures would be his downfall.
It's like hitting a brick wall. Sometimes I almost want to cry, but you know, as I know with us guys, we don't try to cry as much.
So Jake is a miracle child to us because he's outbeat all the odds, outbeat the predictions, and with the other 18 children that there are in the world, Jake is doing the best out of those 18, and he is the oldest living survivor. Welfare fraud means people abusing and using the system to benefit and taking away from the most vulnerable and the neediest of all. It upsets me, it saddens me, not just for Jake, for the other people too that I know that are probably out there too, but don't have the ability to speak or represent themselves.
To the people who think that welfare fraud is not a problem, I would say they are not living in reality. These are benefits that the taxpayers of this country have put monies aside to ensure that people that really need help get the help they need.
You're taking away the services and the quality and the access to good health care for that.
And with the other 18 children that there are in the world, Jake is doing the best out of those 18, and he is the oldest living survivor. Welfare fraud means people abusing and using the system to benefit and taking away from the most vulnerable and the neediest of all. It upsets me, it saddens me, not just for Jake, for the other people too that I know that are probably out there too, but don't have the ability to speak or represent themselves.
To the people who think that welfare fraud is not a problem, I would say they are not living in reality. These are benefits that the taxpayers of this country have put monies aside to ensure that people that really need help get the help they need.
You're taking away the services and the quality and the access to good health care for that most fragile population that really needs that.
People with developmental disabilities are on waiting lists, need medicine, some are homeless, needing food, shelter, clothing, the basics in life. They're in emergency situations and they can't get off the list because there isn't enough supposed money to serve them.
Clearly, this is a problem across the country.
This, throughout the United States, is one of the #1 issues in the budget of every state legislature, but a lot of people had not addressed it. And in Illinois, we had not addressed it.
This initiative, auditing, making sure that welfare programs are being handed out to those that are truly eligible is really a way of making sure that the program is sustainable long term for those that truly need it.
This audit reform was the key, the cornerstone of our entire Medicaid reform project. There were close to 3 million people on Medicaid. We probably had close to 350,000 people who should not be there in the system, and that was costing $350 million. And I had no qualms in addressing all the other legislators as to, I think, what the outcome would be, that it would be favorable for everybody in the state of Illinois, that the Medicaid population would get more services, better access, and quality health care. We would save money for the state.
Because at the end of the day, we have to make sure that benefits that are there for those that are truly needy and depend on them are there and are sustainable long term. And we all want that person or persons that are receiving welfare to become independent and self-sufficient. That's the goal.
As we get Jake more independent, he will cost less in the long run.
I really want to get a job because I really do not like being home a lot. It's to me really boring, so I'm also hoping to someday be a self-advocate, speak out for kids with brain malformation disabilities.
This has no party label to it. This is about principle. It's about making sure that these benefits are there for those that are truly eligible and that they're sustainable.
There's no excuse. There's no excuse for 300,000 sitting on the Medicaid system that should not have been using the funds.
If states do not get welfare fraud under control, they will find over time that the benefits may not be there for those that are truly eligible.
Why would you not want to save money, help the most vulnerable, and help society and taxpayers as a whole?
And that was a powerful video. I think watching that video, it's going to finally catch up here in Georgia. You know, if just like that kid, they cut off his medication because of the fraud got so bad, and you know, we can't sustain ourselves in Georgia if we continue down the same road. You know, it's going to keep stacking up, and we know there's fraud. You know, just as I said before, you know, since 2003, $1 trillion just in improper payments, just looking barely into it, really. So that's why here in this committee hearing, I think, you know, we need to have sensible and smart policies, because you need to be careful how you handle the fraud, because you don't want to cut a kid like him, because we know we have kids here in Georgia who are going through the same stuff. So we want him to keep his medication, but do it smart, but get and catch the fraud, you know. So definitely that's powerful. I mean, and as you said, there's no party label. So, you know, this is an issue that affects all of us in our own communities.
Exactly, and Georgia is taking a lot of steps in the right direction, so it's very encouraging to see the work that you are doing to identify and eliminate these issues. What this reform will do is it gives you yet another tool that you can add to your toolbox to further the good work that's already being done in Georgia. And like I said, please feel free to reach out to us at FGA, and we're more than happy to provide any research and support that we can as you move through this process.
You mentioned people that were receiving benefits but owned valuable property. Georgia has in place a Medicaid estate recovery to allow us to go back and get some of that money back if they own more than $25,000 worth of property or something like that. Are you familiar with that?
Vaguely, yes.
And you mentioned lottery winners, and I made a comment about that the last time we met, that it would be interesting to see if there's a way to identify some of these folks that are out there even playing the lottery, regardless of having to go after them whether they win or not, you know, because, and I know that's a stretch, that may be only in my dreams that we'd be able to do that, but do we have anything in place that would allow us to identify people who have back child support, who are receiving Medicaid or SNAP benefits in the event that they win that lottery? Because that's happening every day, even on smaller levels. They'll win a couple of $100 or a couple of $1,000 from a scratch-off lottery ticket.
Right, and the child support issue is one that we're seeing very commonly. There are many states that will cut off eligibility for individuals who are arrears in their child support. The logic being, if you're not living up to your responsibilities, and these benefits are being given in part to allow you to do that to help benefit your children, then we are not going to allow you to continue to live, to continue to receive benefits if you're not taking the steps that you need to take to care for your children that you're obligated to care for. We spoke about the property ownership and the lottery winners as well. I mean, the extreme examples are always the ones that really jump out and really alert us to the fact that there's all kinds of problems going on in the system, that there may be some wrenches in the machine, so to speak. But that checklist that you all received helps you identify several areas that, aren't these big headline grabbing areas of fraud, but are areas of fraud and waste that are very common. One of the most common, I would say, is looking at folks who live on borders. And I know Georgia has a lot of borders with neighboring states. Being able to see if somebody gets a job, over in South Carolina or down in Florida or even up in Tennessee and are living off of income they're earning from another state but still receiving benefits from Georgia because they live right on that edge. So with the help of some of the vendors that provide this data, you're able to, like I said, in close to real time, find this information. And, it takes 15 minutes for LexisNexis to figure out when I change cell phone plans, which I did not know, and that's absolutely incredible. But think about how that could be employed when somebody who's been receiving benefits gets a job in a neighboring state. How quickly could you learn that information and be able to reassess their eligibility?
Thank you so much, Andrew.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Logan Spike. She's from the State Government Relations. She's a State Government Relations Manager with the Heartland Institute.
Good afternoon. Is this on? You all hear me okay? Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. My name is Logan Pike, as Chairman Clark said. I'm one of the government relations managers at the Heartland Institute. Heartland's a 31-year-old national nonprofit research organization. Our mission is to develop and promote free market solutions that empower people. One of the main issues Heartland has focused on in the past decade is welfare reform. In 2008, in partnership with Gary McDougall, he's a nationally recognized expert on welfare reform, we published Welfare After 10 Years. It was an in-depth study that assigned grades to 50 states and the District of Columbia based on how they implemented the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act. From here on out, I'm going to refer to that as welfare reform because it's a very long title. In March of last year, we released an updated report card that you have right there in front of you. The Welfare Reform 1996 law granted states the flexibility needed in order to reform their welfare programs. It created the TANF program. A lot of states have have used this to reform their welfare programs. Many states have not. There's a lot of policies, thoughtful policies that have been developed in many states. Georgia, in both our report cards, scored in the bottom half of the states. On our most recent one, they scored 44th overall. While Georgia's had some success at reducing its TANF numbers in the past 15 years, I guess, its overall poverty rates actually continue to increase. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, small area income and poverty estimates data, Georgia's poverty rate increased 24% since 1996. In our 2015 report card, we looked at 5 different policies in order to grade states. I'll briefly run through an explanation of each and kind of let you know where Georgia sits. The first policy we looked at is work requirements that Chairman Clark mentioned in his opening remarks. These are rules requiring a person engage in work or work-related activities before being eligible for the TANF program or in order to remain eligible for the TANF program. 41 states have been successful at requiring states to be engaged in work or work-related activities before actually being eligible for the program. The federal government, they list 12 different actual programs that you can be enrolled in that are considered work-related activities, all the way from actually being enrolled in a full or a part-time job to working towards a GED, participating in a vocational program, even a community service role. Georgia currently allows a 3-month period where recipients do not have to be engaged in a work-related activity, one of those 12 programs. This 3-month period is really a wasted time that Georgia TANF recipients could be using to gain the skills and the knowledge that they need to create a self-sustaining life for themselves and their family. The next policy Heartland examined is a cash diversion program. This is a policy that allows caseworkers to give a lump sum cash payment on a short-term needs basis. I use the example of a single mother who's on her way to work and her car breaks down. She doesn't have the cash reserves to help pay for her car. The cash diversion program would help give her that one-time lump sum so that she's able to do that, get back on her feet, provide for her family without completely enrolling her in the TANF program, which in the next policy we look at, she would be allowed to be on for 48 months. So cash diversion can also cover a short-term financial gap when a family's earned income temporarily stops or is reduced. The intention of the cash diversion is to do exactly what it states, to divert the family from the immediate crisis and the need for ongoing TANF benefits. 33 states have this in place. Georgia is unfortunately not one of them. Without this effective cash diversion program, like I mentioned, it's just needlessly creating more dependency when you're putting people on the TANF rolls that might just need that one-time short-term lump payment. And the third policy we look at is the lifetime limits on eligibility for aid. The federal requirement on lifetime limits is 60 months or 5 years, although states are allowed to exempt 20% of their TANF cases from that limit. Georgia currently has come a long way, and they've reduced it down to 48 months, so you can be on TANF for that long. Some states have even gone further. Arizona last session went to 12 months for TANF. States even as diverse as Connecticut and Idaho, Indiana, and Arkansas, I believe, all have under 30 months time limits. So it's important to keep in mind. I always say that the T in TANF, the first letter, it stands for temporary. It is a program where recipients, it's supposed to help people in need, but it's not meant to create incentives for people to be idle. The fourth policy we examine is the strictness of sanctions that states have in place for TANF. Cash payments through TANF are intended as a reward and act as a support system for people who are actively trying to move from dependency to self-sufficiency. And the cash payment should be reduced or eliminated if the recipient fails to do his or her part. Studies have found being sanctioned increases the likelihood of transition off of TANF cash assistance, and this effect actually increases with the duration of the sanction. Currently, Georgia employs a partial sanction, where only the adult portion of the TANF check is withheld even after repeated infractions. This allows recipients to retain the bulk of their TANF benefits. The stronger sanctions, such as a full family sanction, will encourage workforce participation and self-sufficiency directly. It would give non-compliant recipients little choice but to enter the workforce in order to receive aid. It would also help them indirectly by preparing them for the real world consequences of their choices. Some states require actual TANF enrollees to sign an agreement with the Health and Human Services Department that directly lays out what the repercussions are if they don't comply with the sanctions, because a lot of people on TANF aren't aware of this. Years before our report card was actually released, one of our co-authors, Gary McDougall, he released a book called Make a Difference. In his book, Gary discusses an experiment that was carried out by the Institute for Educational Leadership. They used this fictional Hernandez family, which is a typical family in poverty. The experiment examined more than 20 federal, state, and local programs that could be helpful in the struggle for the Hernandez family to escape poverty. During the experiment, actual members of Congress and policymakers and journalists played the part of the family. They learned the hurdles that they had to surmount to get help in the various intricacies of the welfare programs. The participants actually found themselves cutting corners and selectively giving information to the array of program representatives present. They found that the 13 most important programs for the Hernandez family were generated by 5 committees and 6 subcommittees in the House, 4 committees and 3 subcommittees in the Senate, and 6 subdepartments, 1 independent agency, and 7 agencies in the executive branch. This brings me to the last policy that we surveyed in our report card, which is the idea of service integration. Service integration involves organizing state human services in order to allow for a coordinated, holistic, one-stop delivery of services that can then be connected to the local community and employers. In addition to cash assistance, welfare recipients are usually in need of other services to enable them to become self-sufficient, whether that is alcohol and substance abuse, transportation, child care. Rather than making TANF eligible people go from one location, oftentimes they don't have a car, to go from one location to another location in order to receive this assistance. Service integration would organize this often with a single caseworker or a self-sufficiency coach, and ideally in the same location. Service integration should also really be of keen interest to policymakers. Federal government programs are notoriously fragmented, and states must work really hard to connect them. Billions of public dollars are poured every year into low-income communities through so many different programs run by so many different bureaucracies that often it takes a very in-depth analysis to figure out how much money a state's actually spending on these welfare programs. So service integration really is a promising route to improving efficiency and accountability in a part of government that has long resisted both. I would be remiss if I didn't mention what was accomplished in Missouri last year. Heartland's 2015 welfare report card that you have in front of me ranked Missouri dead last. They introduced a bill that did all 5 of these things, that put in immediate work requirements, a cash diversion program, lower lifetime limits, stricter sanctions, and integrated more of their services. We, in all of our research, estimate that they will go from an F-ranked state to an A-ranked state. Most of the reforms I mentioned today would help curb TANF fraud in Georgia, but more importantly, it will really put in the proper incentives needed for the people that are stuck in this program to go from dependency to self-sufficiency. That's all I have, but I'll answer any questions the committee may have.
With the cash diversion fund, do you have any data showing maybe the latest state that has done it, how much it helped, with people not going on?
The latest state that implemented it would be Missouri or Kansas, but we would have to look to see, since they just implemented, how many people. We can try and find that data. I'm assuming you're asking for how many they've actually reduced the welfare rolls by putting the people in this program instead.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
Because it definitely seems to make common sense. It seems like it would be a great thing to have.
Yeah,
here in
I don't have
Georgia,
that information, but we can find that. We can also maybe try and find how much money a state has saved by doing that too.
How does one of the things we have with TANF 48 months, but compared to states, jail look much say with 24 months. How much? Because I know some people are struggling, so maybe they can't get on their feet fast enough or something. So maybe they need more time, So they're. Mm-hmm. But do you see it helping with it being less months? So it's making. Do you see more people getting on their feet faster after hitting hard times?
Yeah, I mentioned that Also, I know that some states, Michigan actually implemented, because they did find that there are, a lot of people are different, a lot of cases are different, where it is going to take some people a longer time. They implemented a stop the clock provision, which actually means if there's any kind of health issue, if an unemployment rate goes below or above a certain number, it won't go towards their time limits. So that's something that they implemented.
It was something you just kind of mentioned in passing, but it caught my ear, signing of an agreement to where somebody actually sits down and talks you through all these things. I was talking with my colleagues that it would be interesting to go on some of these services and actually get a better understanding, and we may do that. What does that look like? I mean, that's a fairly simple rule change where somebody sits down and talks with you point by point, very simple, plain language, and then signing it on the end. What state has implemented that so I can look at?
A few states have. Missouri is one that just did when they passed their Strengthening Missouri's Family Act. It was SB 24 was the bill. Basically, they found that there are a lot of people that are going on these programs and they're getting enrolled, but they're not really learning the rules or what is required of them in order to be compliant. So it's a face-to-face meeting. They did it for sanctions. Basically, you have a face-to-face meeting. You sign an agreement where you understand the implications. They do where you can have one infraction and you'll have another face-to-face meeting, and after that the entire TANF check is withheld after that happens.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions from the committee members?
Are those work requirements the ones that Governor Deal opted out of? Is that the...
That's different. I think you're thinking of SNAP.
Okay.
And I think those are a little easier because with the federal waiver, it doesn't really take the legislature to go through this battle to try and implement them. It basically would just take Governor Deal to say, no, we're not going to accept the waiver. We're going to require people that are receiving food stamps to work. That's since TANF is a block grant program, it would take something like a bill in order to change that, because states now have a little bit more flexibility over what their program looks like.
Thank you so much, Logan.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you all so much for coming out today, and definitely I learned a lot, and I'm sure all the committee members did also. I just want to remind that all of us are leaders in different areas of life, and being a leader means the higher you go and the more of, I guess you can say, powerful position or whatever position should be a position of influence to help others and to give of yourself and serve others. I mean, that's what we do in the military. The higher you go, the more you're supposed to lay down and be that rug for people to walk across, pretty much. I mean, that's why you want to be a leader. So I know all of us, in our positions, that's why we all wanted to be leaders, and definitely in welfare, helping people. That means that supposedly we are asking for that position because we want to help the truly needy. We want to help the people, the men, women, and children who are struggling, who have hit hard times. So hopefully, as we move forward, that we're always thinking about others and not ourselves, not our positions, not our jobs, but how can we help others live a more comfortable life, but also be getting on their feet and hopefully chasing after the American dream. And then the people who are disabled and struggling, then we need to take care of them. We need to help them out, and they shouldn't be on our list. So thank you so much to all of you for coming out, and we will, after today, have the next committee hearing date set. So thank you so much. Meeting